what they are. Okay? So the hypothetical reconstruction of this individual. There you see it looking upright, and notice it has a tool in its hand. Now, what is that based on? It's based on the assumption that since Ramapithecus had small dentition, then it couldn't defend itself with its teeth, and therefore it must have had to use tools. And since it must have had to use tools, it must have then walked upright because it couldn't walk on all fours and carry the tools at the same time. So it must have looked like this. That's the way the reasoning goes. But let's take a look at the actual fossil evidence to support that. So here we see pre-1977 the fossil evidence for Ramapithecus. Say, well, wait a minute. There is the hypothetical reconstruction, but it's based on that upper left-hand corner mandibular remains only. Whoa. Now, here's what's interesting. Notice that none of the pieces are touching. So you can manipulate this mandibular section to make it look very rounded like that. There's what man's looks like. Man's with our 32 teeth, upper and lower. We have a U-shaped mandibular shape. Now, you can make this look like that, and you know, that's okay, because within reason, they didn't have enough pieces to actually make it look one way or the other, and so they made it look like that, okay? But the truth of the matter is, then they found the rest of the postcranial remains of this individual. It neither turned out to be a man-like ape nor an ape-like man. It turned out to look like this. A V-shaped jaw. Not a chimpanzee, but similar to that chimpanzee, a primate, and guess what that primate turned out to be? There it is. Your alleged ancestor. An entire generation. When I was a senior at Cal State Northridge, this is what was taught as our earliest known hominid. It now is absolutely clear. A living fossil, the orangutan, is what those turned out to be. Very much like modern orangs. Only a little bit different in variety. Remember what I talked about with stasis? Clear example of stasis. All right, so in fact, I remember being in graduate school and one student coming into the class one day being so upset about the fact that this fossil was no longer in man's hominid evolution, that she said, oh, it was just like my Aunt Betsy died. I can't believe it. They were that committed to evolution. Okay, let's move on then to some other candidates. The Australopithecines. Australopithecus is the genus name, and it refers to southern ape. Here we see some of the species. There are other species now, but these are the main ones, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but there's Australopithecus robustus, Australopithecus afarensis, and Australopithecus africanus. Those are some of the main species. So here we see Australopithecus robustus down over here, referred to as Zinjanthropus boisei. Okay? Go to graduate school and learn how to do all these pronunciations. Doesn't mean you know anything, but you can say the pronunciations. This was found by Dr. Louis Leakey beginning back in the 1950s. Mary Leakey and Louis Leakey did work at Olduvai Gorge for many years, and one of the early specimens, I think it was 1959, they found, affectionately they called it Zinj. And Zinjanthropus was the candidate in those days. But notice something right. Let's see, let me get the cursor to go up there, right there at the top. Notice there's a sagittal crest. You don't have a sagittal. Feel the top of your head. You'll notice it's very smooth. There's no sagittal crest there. That's only found in the great apes. So when other fossil candidates were found that they thought were better, of course, then Zinj fell out of the family tree and is no longer considered one of the main players in the line of human evolution. Then Australopithecus africanus, which was over here beginning in the 1920s. Dr. Raymond Dart found what is called the Tong child over in Africa. And he was very excited because it seemed to have characteristics he thought were intermediate between the great apes and humans. Well, we found many of the adult specimens of these Australopithecus africanus type organisms, and they are not fossil intermediates at all. They are an extinct variety of ape, not related to human origins. And then finally, the most famous of these three, Australopithecus afarensis, southern ape of the Afar Triangle. Here we see the remains of the very famous specimen called Lucy. Everybody's heard of Lucy. Beginning in the 1970s, Dr. Donald Johanson, Dr. Tim White, nobody knew who they were when they found Lucy, named after the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. That's where they got that name, not based on some scientific information. 40% complete. What they did is they modeled one side, so if you have one limb, the arm bones, the humerus, radius, and so forth, the ulna, you can reconstruct the other side to match it up so you can get your organism. Now the thing about these Australopithecines is the people that did the most study on them, even to this day, Dr. Charles Oxnard and the professor he studied under, Dr. Zolli Zuckerman, what a name, but these were brilliant scientists that did multivariate analysis on these Australopithecines. They are committed evolutionists, but they have acknowledged that these Australopithecines did not walk upright like you and I, but had a form of locomotion similar to orangs. That information has never been refuted. Now what's most interesting, beginning in the 1990s, there were a group of scientists that started to look at the inner ear canals of these Australopithecines. And your inner ear canals, if you haven't studied anatomy, they determine your location in time and space. They will tell you if you're laying down because the fluid will flow a certain way. You have 3 inner ear canals, and if you're laying down, the fluid flows one way. If you're standing up, it flows another way. They're connected into the brain, and they're simply a sensor that tells you where you are in time and space. Are you standing up? Are you sitting down? Are you laying down? And so forth. And these inner ear canals are consistent with organisms that did not walk upright. So what were the Australopithecines? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. They're simply an extinct variety of ape. Not like modern apes we have today, but not related to human origins. Now, the next candidate, Java Man, makes a mean cup of coffee. Pithecanthropus erectus. This was found way back at the turn of the 20th century by Eugene Dubois, who was, actually a disciple of Ernst Haeckel. Ooh, you remember that name? He's the one that did all those forgeries, embryological forgeries that supposedly showed the evolution of embryos. Turned out to be completely a hoax. But at that time, Dubois went over to what was then called the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, we call it today, and began to look for evidence of human evolution. And he found a skull cap, he found some teeth, and he also found a femur bone. That's your upper leg bone. And he reconstructed those, and he said, okay, this is your ancestor. There's a bust, to prove that it's true. And he named it Pithecanthropus erectus, upright walking man. Okay, upright walking ape man is what that actually means. Well, it was proven in the 1990s by microanalysis, microbone analysis, that the skull cap and the femur bone are not from the same individual. They are from 2 totally individuals. And that Dubois had hidden the fact that he had found 2 modern Homo sapien skulls called the Wajak skulls, and he had not announced that because his fossil ape man would not have been received. Not evidence of macroevolution, but a compilation of bones from different organisms. The femur bone seems to have been from a Homo sapiens, although it had pathological disease. You can see some of that right there. The skull cap, hard to say what it was from at this point. It does not appear to be human, though. And then another fossil candidate, Homo